Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. Mike McDaniel not here today. He is a little bit busy, but I am joined by Mr. Jacey Zembal of the Wolfpack Central.com. Jacey covering NC State for the Rivals Network. Jacey, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate your time here today. We're looking to preview the the upcoming Wolfpack season. 2023 going to be year 11 for Dave Doeren. It seems like there's been there's a couple guys in the ACC they're kind of becoming the old guard here, and I think of him, I think of Dave Clawson, obviously Dabo, Pat Narduzzi, but Dave Doeren, year 11. I was going to ask you, I guess, obviously a guy, there's no questions about job security here. My question is, I guess, for him, coming back after 2018, so Eli Drinkwitz, Ryan Finley, there was a whole crew of NFL draft picks, everybody. I was thinking things might kind of go downhill from there, and 2019 was a little rough, but with a bunch of injuries. And then since then, 3 years of eight-plus wins. Has there been anything that he's changed or that you've observed that's different, that's kind of allowed him to have this second act at NC State, or is it kind of the same as it always was, and 2019 was just a blip?
I think 2019 was a blip in some ways, but in terms of big picture, I think what Dave Doeren has become is a CEO type where, he's not involved as much on the I shouldn't say day-to-day, but, it's not like he's calling the plays. It's not like he's running the defense. It's not like he's trying to do a lot of different things and wear a lot of different hats, where I think now, he trusts Tony Gibson to run his defense. He completely trust Robert Anae to run the offense this upcoming year. And I think that's just the way college football is trending anyway, because you look at it, there's certain times of the year where recruiting and NIL and the transfer portal and trying to hiring assistant coaches, it's very intense for the head coach these days. Now they're very well compensated for that intensity, but it's a different ball game now than say even 5 years ago. In terms of 2019, it was probably like a perfect storm where you mentioned Eli Drinkwitz. He gets the Missouri or first App State job. Now he's at Missouri. But Ryan Finley, Kelvin Harmon, and you throw in Jacoby Myers, those were, and Jalen Samuels and Nyheim Hines. I mean, there were so many good players that all left around the same time. And college football is all about the quarterback. There's nothing that anyone can convince me otherwise. We see it all over the place. Probably the biggest reasons, we've seen Florida State and Miami not have as much success as other than Jameis Winston, who's been the NFL quarterback. Now they're hopeful Jordan Travis will be. And, obviously Miami in the heyday was Steve Walsh and Vinny Testaverde and at least on the college level, Gino Torretta and Jim Kelly and Bernie Kosar. I mean, it was on and on and on. So, NC State did not have a logical successor for Ryan Finley. Devin Leary was young, very young at that time, and then he got hurt. So, between losing the receivers and the offensive coordinator and having an unproven quarterback and then the injuries, 2019, makes more sense than probably people realized at the time. They were going to take a dip. But I think what 2019 did is get a lot of younger players on the field and get those reps and get those experiences, even if they weren't always good. And that's kind of like the way NC State has been, is that younger guys take their lumps and then they win as upperclassmen, or they do well as upperclassmen. And that's kind of been the one, good quarterback play between Jacoby Brissett, Ryan Finley, Devin Leary, and then experienced guys. Maybe not too many first-round picks. There's been a few. Garrett Bradbury, Ekemekwana. I'm sure I'm for Bradley Chubb. Maybe I'm forgetting somebody else, but it's been guys who are, you look back, you're like, oh, 3-year starter. Guys that maybe by the time they're seniors, they're all conference caliber players. Maybe entered as 3-star recruits, but as seniors, all conference type players.
There has been a lot of really good development guys that get significantly better from coming in from high school versus, when they're leaving as seniors. Have you gotten a sense to, I keep hearing Dave's name come up for various kind of high profile job searches. Do you think he's trying to find a way out, or do you anticipate him being in Raleigh basically as long as NC State will have him?
Yeah, I think he could be very, very picky. I mean, he's got a good setup.
Mm-hmm.
There's pressure, but not crazy pressure. NC State is not like Auburn where you have to win within 2 3 years or you get fired. It's not that kind of setup. Traditionally, but I think the pressure and I think Dave puts pressure on himself is to compete for titles, to have 10+ win seasons. Those are the things that have eluded him. Now, it likely, I mean, I'm pretty sure it would have happened if they had played UCLA in the bowl game, but, you know, typical things, crazy things that happened at NC State 4 or 5 hours before the bowl game in San Diego, the game gets canceled. But, I think it would have been a great game if it was completely 100% healthy UCLA versus NC State. But at least on that day, if UCLA was devastated, that would have been the 10th win. So that's something that's eluded NC State. They've had a couple of years where they were hopeful to break through and represent the old Atlantic Division. But, Clemson is Clemson. And then before Clemson, it was Florida State. So, it hasn't been the easiest path. But, I think those are the big things. In terms of, like, jobs that have popped up here and there, Tennessee had a very crazy job, coaching search. And maybe in theory that could have been a place. But again, at that time, Tennessee was a little on the crazy side, and obviously it ended up with Philip Fulmer taking over as AD. He's been popped up for other jobs like Nebraska or Ole Miss as possibilities, but I don't think I think it's the job of all coaches' agents to get their clients to get their names out there. It's a compliment in terms of that means they're doing well. And obviously everybody wants to re-up and get as much money as they possibly can when they're doing well. Mm-hmm. So that's how I've always viewed, certain coaches when it comes to rumors. That's the agent's job. He wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't trying to at least come up with something as potential leverage. But, it wouldn't shock me, though, if we look back and Dave ends up at NC State for like 20-some years. I don't think he'll be that guy who coaches till he's like 70. I don't think he has that kind of long-range goal. And in the past, he's even talked about mid-50s, but I have a hunch that he'll blow past that mark at some point. So, I mean, like you said, you look at it like, the pressures have definitely increased the last few years with everything I just talked about before, but then so has the money.
That's true. You talk about if he's there for 20 years, he's already halfway there if that's what he's trying to do. So one of the things you mentioned, Jacey, was that obviously, I don't know that we're breaking news here saying that quarterback is the most important position on the field, on the team, and really can kind of make or break a program's fortunes. Devin Leary transfers out to Kentucky, where he'll go play. Brennan Armstrong transfers in. He reunites with his old offensive coordinator from Virginia, Robert Anae. One of the things that stuck out to me about that, Robert Anae, at least in his time at Virginia, it felt like they did some pretty creative, almost like unusual stuff on offense with formations, position groups, or player packages, some of those things. With Brennan Armstrong now with him in Raleigh, do you anticipate schematically that this NC State offense will look more like the one it did, like what it did in UVA when he was there, or do you think this looks maybe a little bit more similar to what Tim Beck has been running here the last few years?
That was one of the interesting questions that we had when Anae was hired. So when Tim Beck was hired, they kept the terminology, from the previous regime. So I thought that was very interesting at that time. When Anae was hired, I asked him if he was going to keep the same terminology, and he said no. So that let me know, like, okay, everything changes. Players are going to have to learn different things. In terms of Armstrong, it's like having a coach on the field, having someone who knows the language. He can help the players out and know different things. Obviously the fascinating thing with, you mentioned Virginia, and then last year and I was at Syracuse. And he'll say that he will do a lot of the same things that he did at Virginia, but then there were some wrinkles that he added at Syracuse because they had a very good ground game that might be different than what Armstrong had, previously. So, the $1 million question is what version of Brennan Armstrong will NC State get this year? Now, I've always maintained Virginia was a I wouldn't say a near impossible situation for Armstrong last year, but it wasn't just losing coaches. He did lose Anae and he lost his quarterback coach at Syracuse. I get all that. But he also lost an NFL tight end. He also lost pretty much the entire offensive line from the sounds of it to the transfer portal or graduating or going pro early, whatever. Billy Kemp gets hurt, early in the season. Good, solid wide receiver. So all of a sudden, that Virginia offense of 2 years ago is down to a very creative flex tight end wide receiver type, and Wicks, who I think went like in the 6th round or 5th round or somewhere in the NFL draft at wide receiver. Obviously there wasn't much of a running game. I watched Virginia play Illinois early in the season. Their offense looked lost. Mm-hmm. It was one of those deals where, and Illinois had 3 guys in the secondary that were drafted. So, I mean, it was a very, very good secondary, but Virginia looked lost. So, the struggles, obviously I didn't watch a lot of Virginia last year, but it didn't really change. So, the key is, will Brennan Armstrong revert to 2 years ago, have the time from the offensive line, have the weapons from the receivers, have a ground game to balance things out, and then, everything works out well. I do think one thing that, is a nice option, and, Georgia Tech fans are familiar with MJ Morris a little bit from Carrollton, Georgia. He, for about a month, probably figured he was the guy, mm-hmm. And then Brennan Armstrong and Anae come in, and, it was pretty much from the start, he was going to be battling to be this, he was going to be a backup. And they don't really have a proven third string, so it wasn't like, he had competition for second string. But hypothetically, if the worst case scenario happens, Armstrong struggles, there is a lot of excitement about what MJ Morris could be. He flashed it, second half against Virginia Tech, full game against Wake Forest, struggled against Boston College, then he was injured. So, there's not a lot of body of work with MJ, but what we've seen was encouraging. So my hunch is somehow, some way, the quarterback position will play itself out. I just don't know exactly how it's going to play itself out, but I do believe in the end, NC State will have a good situation, probably for the second half of the season, one way or the other.
One of the things we talked with Mark Ennis about with Louisville was that they might try to work in Pierce Clarkston for a drive or two in each game, get him some game reps, get him some experience. Do you anticipate something like that with MJ Morris, or is it he's a clear number 2, comes in for backup quarterback duty, whatever that means?
Yeah, I think it would be backup quarterback duty. I think in an absolute perfect world for everybody involved is Armstrong plays really well and stays healthy, and MJ Morris plays 4 games and gets to preserve a redshirt year, which he didn't get to have last year because he played more than 4 games. So, some will say, well, maybe he won't use that extra year of eligibility down the road or whatever, life happens. But if NC State could have 3 years of MJ Morris starting compared to 2, then that's a pretty good setup for NC State. So it's just one of those little things that will lurk throughout the season. Exactly how much will MJ play. But the reality is they have a true freshman quarterback as the third stringer, or a walk-on is the third stringer. They don't have the typical third string quarterback. So under that premise, odds are good maybe that MJ ends up playing more than 4 games. But, you got to try at least at some point in the season, right? You got to, maybe if they can get through 5-6 games, the chances of getting, through the magic number of, say, 8 games? 9 games if you don't count the bowl game. I don't know how the bowl eligibility counts, but we'll see. That's just one of those little nerd football type topics that'll pop up during the season whenever MJ hits game number 4.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful, wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They have t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. They got a couple of 3/4 shirts. They got buttons, stickers, all sorts of things. Things for men, women, children, something for the whole family. Every Georgia Tech fan in your life can use something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. They've got some new things all the time coming. Recently came out with some new player shirts, jerseys, I guess as the kids would call them. Things with a logo on the front, a number on the front, and a number on the back, along with a name. They got shirts for both Zach Pyron as well as Dante Smith, who kind of project to be Georgia Tech's starting quarterback and running back this year. So if you want to support those players, I believe they get some NIL money out of it too. So just keep that in mind for what it's worth. They've got the Juniors Grill shirt. They've got all sorts of great products there. They've also recently come out with a clearance section. So if you're looking for some T-shirts or a couple of hoodies for a slightly lower price point, go check out the clearance section. Once again, it is section103.com or at section_103 on Instagram. Give them a follow. Check it out. All things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. Again, using the official team colors, the official word marks, everything. It is all officially licensed. It is super comfortable, super high quality. I love mine. You will love yours as well. Check out the performance wear if you're looking for things to keep you cool here during the summer. In any case, one more time, that is section103.com, the internet's best place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. That's it for now. Let's get back to the show. Well, and I know Brennan Armstrong does have some injuries in his history, but as you mentioned or kind of alluded to, there's also some context of what was or wasn't around him that I think kind of contributed there. So not saying it will happen again, but, again, there is a little bit of a track record there. Jacey, if you look at this roster and you had to pick out one or two areas that are really going to particularly be the strength of this team, what would you say?
Definitely on the defensive side. They have a lot of experience. It's funny, Coach Gibson, the defensive coordinator, Tony Gibson, he just said literally yesterday it's the best defensive line he's ever coached. And
wow.
he's been the defensive coordinator for, I think, 8 years now, a difference between West Virginia and NC State. And obviously he's coached other position groups in much longer than 8 years. But, it was one of those statements where it's like, okay, that's interesting. The linebackers should be very good. In terms of like the very, very most experienced, biggest upside position is the cornerback spot with the starters. Aiden White should be an all-conference caliber player again. Missed the spring with an injury, but assuming he is back 100% and playing the way he did last year, he's a legit candidate to draw NFL attention as a junior. And then Shaheem Battle is he's going to be one of those guys who could have the option of doing 6 years of college football because he redshirted because he'll get a COVID year, and one way or the other he could end up saying like being a 4 or 5 year starter. I forget the exact number, but between the two of them, the two starting corners are very well off. But in terms of the unique thing about NC State's defense, why it's set up well for this year. There was a lot of concern by some fans last year about what might the defense look like, but I kept going back to the same thing. It was unfortunate that there were injuries. Definitely definitely affected the defense the last 2 years. Having Isaiah Moore get his season cut short, having Peyton Wilson miss the 2021 season for the most part. I think he played basically a game and maybe a quarter or 2 quarters, whatever it was when he got injured. But because of those injuries at linebacker, it opened up the door where Devon Betty and Jalen Scott got valuable playing time in the past. Peyton Wilson came back this year, which was a shock to many, partly because of his injury history in the past, where now he'll prove, that he can get through the entire schedule and be 100% going into NFL workouts next spring. The defensive line, C.J. Clark has missed time in the past. He's now officially the full-time nose tackle, where he's played nose tackle and defensive end. Savion Jackson has missed a chunk of games the last 2 years at defensive end. There was Tyler Baker-Williams missed a chunk of time in the past at nickel, which opened up the door for players to get playing time like Devin Boykin. Tyler Baker-Williams is no longer, he graduated. So these past players who missed time, some who are back, some who have graduated, basically open up the door where, okay, Jalen Scott, Devon Betty, Jakeem Harris, Devin Boykin, Davin Van to a certain extent. These are guys who got a lot more experience than they would have if everybody had stayed healthy and the payoff is this year. So I don't think the defense may not have as many playmakers in the front seven because Drake Thomas was an incredible playmaker to go with Peyton Wilson, but they'll be good. It's still going to be a very stingy defense, and at least that's my prediction. They'll be, they have veterans at safety. They'll get pushed. Sean Brown is a younger player who, could push. Caden Fordham is an outside linebacker who could push. They're excited about. Well, I think one of the reasons they're excited about the D line, they think they got 8 legit guys for the rotation. So even if one guy or two guys get hurt this year at some point, and defensive linemen usually always get hurt because of the nature of that position, then I think they have options. Noah Potter's a kid who had big upside coming out of high school, and then nothing but injuries at Ohio State. Got on the field some at Cincinnati. Now finally 100% healthy. We'll see how good he is as a rotational defensive end. So there's different guys that are pieces. Maybe not glamorous, but you have to have depth. And pretty much there might be some battles at maybe for backup nickel or backup cornerback, one of the safety spots. But in terms of depth, State should be pretty good defensively.
I look at the receiver position, and losing Thayer Thomas, losing Devin Carter, losing Keon Lesane, top 3 receivers all gone from last year.
Lesane is back.
Oh, Lesane is back. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Lesane is back.
I missed that. Sorry. But, missing out certainly on the top 2 guys, and 2 of the really go-to guys for the last few years for NC State. If I were to ask you what the weakness or where the biggest question mark on the team is, would you say that receiver room, or is there somewhere else that you would point to?
No, I definitely would say the receiving options. If you want to also throw in guys who are H-back types, or how they'll get used in the new offense. The problem, one of the concerns last year, even when Devin Leary was healthy, is they didn't have a home run threat at receiver. They didn't have that guy who could make the simple play and go 60. And I think every good team needs to have that in their arsenal. Whether it's a home run running back or a guy who could take the 5-yard pass and go 60. But offense is a lot easier when you get big plays. State was incredible defensively at making sure other teams didn't get big plays. But conversely, on offense, they didn't have many plays, or as Dave Doeren liked to refer to it as explosive plays. So that was a concern with Thayer Thomas and Devin Carter, who were both experienced long-term players. So the trend or the theme of concern about receiver, it really started a year ago, because there was a lot of concern, like, passing game isn't really clicking. What's it going to look like when Thayer's gone? Now Devin could have come back for that extra year. He's now at West Virginia. He had moments, but he was also inconsistent. But it's basically a brand new young group of receivers who around Keon Lesane, who may make plays, but no one really knows until they actually do it. A lot of people can project, but at the end of the day, it's what you do. And I think Kevin Concepcion, a true freshman, will make some plays. He was a guy that I was able to watch essentially 3 years of high school. Another true freshman, Javante Vereen, is one of those hybrid flex tight end types who basically is a wide receiver in a smaller tight end body, or if you want to call him a jumbo-sized jumbo-sized wide receiver, whatever you want to call him. He's a proven playmaker on the high school level. One of the complete X factors who has battled injuries, came from the ranks of Georgia, was a top 250 recruit, and that's DeCorey Collins. Came to Clemson, had some flashes, and then he quit last September, a year ago. So he hasn't played in a very, very long time. Could he be a reliable wide receiver for the Wolfpack? Who knows? The coaches know, but until we see him make plays, it's just hard to know. So, and then there's other guys who were nice recruits and proven players in high school who, could be good, but haven't quite done it yet. And that would be Terrell Timmons, a true sophomore. Julian Gray, a redshirt sophomore. Porter Rooks is a junior. They're all guys who have the potential, but it's going to be very fascinating to see who becomes a big play guy, who becomes the guy that they go to on 3rd and 6, who's the guy they go to in the end zone, or want to just call it the red zone. So there's a lot of roles and things that could happen with the receivers / tight ends that are a little bit unknown. If he stays healthy, and he usually has been healthy, he just had a bad run of luck last year. Converted running back / H-back / tight end, whatever you want to call him. Sometimes I refer to those guys as a weapon. Trent Penix is a guy who could make some things happen. He's got good size. He's very fast, and he has had some nice big plays in the past. He just had everything go wrong with a shoulder injury in the season opener. I'm pretty sure it was the season opener, and it just never really, truly ever recovered the rest of the year. So that was a big loss to the passing game last year. Will there be a guy who catches 80 passes? No, I don't think anyone's expecting that. But if they could have 3-4 guys who can catch between, say, 35 and 50 passes, I think people, at least in the preseason, they'd be loving life if that came true. And I do think the running backs will catch a lot of passes out of the backfield in this offense, where they caught a few passes, but unless it was like a design screen, there wasn't a lot of. They would catch maybe 20, 25 passes in the past. I'll be very curious to see how many dump-off passes go to the backs this year.
Agreed. That was something that they did quite a bit of under Robert Anae up at Virginia, and also at Syracuse, using that with Garrett Schrader and Sean Tucker. So that's something we can keep an eye on as well. Let's look at the schedule here, JC. And one of the things that sticks out to me, there are a handful of tough games here. I see, obviously week 2 against Notre Dame, late September against Louisville, October getting Clemson. Going after that, you get Miami, and then late in the year, obviously to finish out the year, getting the rivalry game against North Carolina. But the thing is, all those games have one thing in common, and every single one of them is going to be happening at Carter Finley Stadium. So how to you does that make a difference in your outlook on the season and the schedule? If you do have a handful of tough games, but every one of them is at home versus some or all of them being on the road?
I think it definitely makes a difference, especially if it's a night game. At one point, pre-conference jumble action with the Coastal and the Atlantic, it would have been Florida State to go with Notre Dame and Clemson this year. Then all of a sudden, and I think at one point, maybe for non-conference, Cincinnati maybe was in the mix, who could be pretty good this year. I'm not quite sure how good Cincy is, but there was a point where it's like, NC State's losing guys. They might be a good team, but that schedule is going to be very tough. UConn is the opener. They crushed UConn last year, and to Jim Moore's credit, because I don't even know how he did it, but they ended up winning 5 out of 8 games, lost the bowl game. So really 5 out of 7 in the regular season, lose the bowl game. And, to me, it was a minor miracle that UConn won 6 games last year. I think the final of that game was 41-10 against State. And the touchdown by UConn happened with like 2 minutes left, probably against the deep reserves. So it was that kind of game. Everybody. No one knows what Notre Dame has. They'll just assume that they're good. And I don't know who Notre Dame's playing in week 1. I don't think they're playing anybody that's like scary good. But the assumption will be is that Notre Dame will have a very good team when they play NC State. Obviously, in these parts, everybody pays attention to Clemson. And, Clemson did very well against State last year. 2 years ago, State had them. They beat them. Took over a couple overtimes, but they beat Clemson. Last year, down in Death Valley, and that was a place where I think playing on the road did make a difference. It just wasn't their night. It wasn't NC State's night. And it's kind of one of the crazy things is that DJ Ungabale played really good. Ran the ball well, passed the ball well, looked very comfortable. And then, from all accounts, couple, say 4 or 5 weeks later, people were not so happy about DJ Ungabale at Clemson. So, I think the schedule sets up okay. Who knows what UNC will look like at the end of the year? Who knows what Miami's going to look like? I mean, there's a lot of ifs in the ACC this year. I think that's reflected in the polls that there isn't a lot of people gung ho about what the league might do. But I think State is a team because of how they have to develop playmakers on offense. They should get better as the season goes on. I don't think the defense will be exposed too many times. Like, I just can't see this defense having teams score 30 plus points on them too many times. But the question will always be, until it's proven, can State win a 33-30 game? I don't know if, even in today's world, I don't know if that's considered a shootout. Some of these teams are scoring in the 40s, but State, it's going to be interesting how many times State gets to say 28 points, which I think is the magic figure. If State can score more than 28 in a game, I think the chances are good that they'll do well. There'll be some teams that it might be a struggle to get to the 28-point mark. And that's kind of like the little rule of thumb, I think, with the Wolfpack this year. I assume whoever the kicker is, that he'll be solid. They brought in a transfer from Western Kentucky who was a Lou Groza Award semifinalist in the past 2 years ago. But walk-on Colin Smith apparently has given him a good run this camp and during the spring. So, it's not absolutely set in stone yet that Braden Narveson is the kicker, but whoever the kicker is, I'll assume he's pretty good. And then the punter last year was a real revelation where the starter got hurt. Walk-on Caden Noonkester comes in. Basically had one bad punt, over the last 5-6 games. He shanked one against UNC, and that's the only real bad punt that I can remember. So he was a true weapon, which you kind of need in college football. Julian Gray's back as a kick returner. The previously mentioned Kevin Concepcion could join Gray as a kicker punt returner. I think they'll be okay in the return game. So it'll be interesting. But, assuming the kick, I think they'll have a lot of close games, so they'll need a good kicker.
You mentioned, obviously on offense, some questions, breaking in a new coordinator, new quarterback, new receiver room, all that stuff. But there is kind of this runway here. Other than the Notre Dame game, you start, as you mentioned, at UConn, then you get VMI, and then at Virginia before hosting Louisville there at the end of September. So a little bit of warm-up time, but like you said, probably an offense. If everyone kind of stays healthy, stays together, they probably get better as the season goes on. So something to keep in mind here. Jacey, do you have a record prediction for how the NC State will finish up this year?
Well, if it's like anything that is always NC State, that usually revolves around an 8-4 regular season. It's almost uncanny how many years it's 8-4 or 7-5.
Set your watch by it.
Yeah, it's just one of those deals. I always kind of judge it like this. I think they'll have a good regular season. I don't know if they'll win like 9-10 games, but State, I judge a good year as who State will get in a bowl game. No disrespect to some of the past bowl opponents. Like I said, if UCLA had been 100% healthy, no COVID, no issues, that would have been a great bowl game. UCLA was coming on strong. They were putting up big numbers. They had NFL guys at tight end. The running back got drafted high. Experienced quarterback. I think even one of the other receivers made the NFL. So that was a nice team. Where sometimes you get into a bowl game, and I know State really bad. Like I said, they really want that 10th win. But if it comes against a team that, coach left, coordinator left, 5 guys are sitting out because they want to preserve their NFL draft stock, it's a different. That's 2023. That's just the reality. Coaches leave, and December has now become like this crazy month where head coaches or assistants leave. You're trying to sign your recruiting class in mid-December. Kids are planning whether they're going into the portal. You trying to get guys to come to your school from the portal, and you might have to hire new assistant coaches. There's just so much on the plate. And then you play a bowl game. So I look at it as like if they can win 8 games and then play against a really good bowl opponent that will get people to watch on TV and get excited, I think that's a good year for NC State.
Point well taken about, bowl games have always been exhibitions, but they are really, really exhibitions now. It's like you said, it's more about the matchup probably than actually winning or losing in a lot of cases for determining success. I'm with you. I think probably just do the simple thing, keep it right down the middle. I'll just take 8-4 as the record for the season. I was tempted to say 9-3. I do like that their toughest games are all at home. I think there's a good chance they can pick off at least one of these teams at some point. But as we've said, questions about the offense in general, what that will look like, how quickly it'll gel. I guess I'll tamp down the expectation just a little bit. But I was tempted to go 9-3, and like you said, that defense should be very, very good. So we will have to see. Jacey, that's all I've got for you today. Really appreciate your time here. This has been incredibly informative. So thank you for coming on. Do you want to tell the people real quick where they can find your stuff?
Well, on Twitter, we're at NC State Rivals, real simple. The website is thewolfpackcentral.com. We have a recruiting YouTube page that's basically under my name, at Jacey Zembal, I believe, on YouTube, where basically any good basketball or football recruits that I see, and I see a lot of them, throughout ACC land or end up at ACC colleges. A lot of the recruits are on that site. All the team coverage stuff, like post-practice interviews, post-game, the Zooms and whatnot that involve NC State, that is under the Wolfpack Central on YouTube. So, that way if I kind of separate it a little bit, because in recruiting, State could be on a guy and then 6 months go by and then he picks another school, and maybe NC State fans don't want to see said recruit that picked a rival school. So sometimes it's nice to give them the option where if they just want NC State stuff, they can go to Wolfpack Central on YouTube. They just want recruiting stuff, or fans of other colleges can see the recruits and the highlights and the scouting videos that I do. Wolfpack Central on the Instagram. I mean, I just started Threads, which is, another crazy 2023 thing, but you just never know. It always feels like every 4 months there's a crisis with Twitter. So,
if we even make it that far.
Well, it was fascinating. All it takes is one tweet, obviously, for Elon Musk to set people in a panic. And this past week, it was about taking away the blocking tool, which, I don't have to block a lot of people, but I can only imagine, the celebrities with massive followings. And then, 4 or 5 hours later, they're like, yeah, it's illegal. You can't take away the blocking tool, because then they would remove the app from the stores. So, it's just funny how morning could start with a crisis, and then by mid-afternoon, crisis is averted. But, that's that's X in 2023. So there's a lot of different variants. But, yeah, I mean, there's anything that basically involves NC State Rivals, I'm sure there's a way to Google it.
Absolutely. Please do. Highly recommended. Jacey, thank you so much for your time. We are going to get out of here and come preview. We have one final preview to record, so we're going to come back and
do the next team.
That would be your in-state rival, the UNC Tar Heels. So,
okay.
They're our final team to record.
Here's the question that people want to answer in the triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the big focus is the fact that they reworked their entire secondary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the sneaky focus is UNC only had 17 sacks, I think, last year.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all these talented defensive linemen from high school. Whoever you have on, ask will UNC actually blitz? That will be the major emphasis for UNC football, at least in the first few games. Will they blitz and actually get pressure on the quarterback?
I think that's been the biggest like what is going on there thing of the Mac Brown era round 2 is the number of talented guys that have gone there and seem like they just haven't gotten better, and the results have been pretty hard to come by, especially on defense.
Well, the two linebackers are very good, Cedric Gray and Power Eccles. And Georgia Tech people, I'm sure, were not happy with Nate McCollum, who was an NC State commit at one point.
Mm.
It's just funny that Nate McCullen ends up at UNC instead of NC State after the period of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously big drama on whether Tez Walker, the other receiver, will be eligible right away or maybe after a game or two, or the NCAA is going to play that thing out. But they have a lot of running backs. They have a lot of defensive linemen.
They do.
Should, and it'll be and because of how well they've recruited. But it'll be interesting to see like what they look like. And again, like I mentioned earlier, who knows what the NC State UNC game at that time of the year. I mean, shoot, last year Ben Finley was the 4th-string quarterback starting against UNC.
Mm-hmm.
So no one saw that one coming.
Who even knows? Yeah. Outdueled Drake May that night, too. How about that?
Well, outduel is a strong word. But what Ben did is he didn't make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a great break when the DB completely fell and slipped on the grass. And Devin Carter got a nice, easy, I don't know if it was like 50 or 60 yards. That's the best way of starting a game, having your cornerback fall on the ground and have the receiver be wide open for the easy touchdown. Can't get any better than that. But but it shows just how good NC State's defense was last year, that they did battle Drake May and did hold him down, and you didn't have all the time in the world. You didn't pick them apart. I don't think it was anything. I don't think it was a Drake May problem. I just kind of credit, hey, NC State's defense was just that good.
We will have to see. We're going to come back and preview them, and that will wrap up our ACC previews.
Well, good deal.
Yeah. So in the meantime, we're going to get out of here. Go find us on Twitter. I'm at FTRS Joey. He is at Jacey Zembal. And you can go find Mike at Mike McDaniel SI. And together we're at BC Podcast ACC. Or once again, go find Jacey at the wolfpackcentral.com, all one word. Or just Google NC State Rivals. You'll find it there as well. He's on YouTube, on Instagram, everywhere else he told you to go find him. Go do that. We are also on Instagram and on YouTube, at BC Podcast ACC on Instagram, at the ACC Football Podcast on YouTube. Go find us there. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere else you go find your podcasts. Jacey, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Enjoy your weekend.
You do as well. Until next time, for Mr. Jacey Zembal, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again soon. Until next time, go Pack and go ACC.